Hello. Okay, so I when I started this channel, I pretty much wanted to keep away from religious topics. I consider myself a religious person, but 20-minute video you really can't give a good message on. I did my series on the 10 plagues. That was more of a let's analyze it, sort of, do a literature type analysis rather than trying to teach anything. But with the murder of Charlie Kirk, there have been replies from both sides which are wrong. Obviously, the people cheering for his death are wrong. But we have had a number of people who are saying, isn't it about time we start to fight back? And that was wrong as well. So I'm going to do, everyone wants to say Charlie Kirk was great. I don't know a lot about Charlie Kirk. I've heard the name, never watched any of his videos, never watched any of his speeches. I've seen some of Louder with Crowder's videos on campuses, and my understanding is Charlie Kirk did a similar thing. Most people will acknowledge he was basically more about free speech than hate speech. People saying he was all about hate speech are the ones who were cheering for his death, and they are all wrong for doing that. So, like I said, if we want to honor him and we want to say he was a great Christian, then we should look at what the Christian response to this should be. And to do this, we've actually got to go back to Mosaic Law. Or I should perhaps say laws plural, because there were, when the law was given to ancient Israel, several different laws were given to them. There was dietary law, which should still be in effect today. The guy who created everything said, don't eat these foods. Modern science has actually said these foods are bad for you. The biggest disrespect or biggest, calamity, whatever you want to call it, that churches have done to their members is tell them that the dietary laws have been done away with, in my opinion. That's an aside. There were other health laws. Supposedly, I would have to do more research on this, but I have heard that one reason why Jews were persecuted during the Middle Ages was because they were following the health laws, the hygiene laws, which kept the rats out of their portions of the city, which in turn kept them from getting bitten by fleas that were carrying bubonic plague. And so people thought they were behind it because they were not being infected as much. Now again, that is something I've heard. I don't know how true it is, but it makes sense if it did happen. There are moral laws. Don't kill. Don't lie. Don't steal. Don't commit adultery. Then there's civil law. If you catch someone killing, here's how you punish them. And that's the important thing we have to look at. So when Israel sinned and was carried off into captivity, a different civil authority was put over them. And so moral law still existed. Killing's still wrong, stealing's still wrong, etc. But you don't have the authority to punish someone under the law that Moses gave because you no longer have civil authority. And this carried on for several kingdoms rising and falling and taking over. It still exists today where you don't have civil authority to do this stuff. This is one thing some people want to point to. There are people who like to pick and choose when they when we should obey the Old Testament law and not. And we should, it says we should punish homosexuals this way and that. No, you're the one saying that the Old Testament law was done away with. You can't do that. Plus, we don't have the civil authority to do it. Even if we, even if you were going to endorse the Old Testament law all of a sudden, God still hasn't given us the civil authority to carry it out. So no, you can't carry out those punishments on your own. I bring this up because this brings us up, Christ comes along. Now here's the thing, the Jews were willing to accept Christ as the Messiah. That's one thing no one seems to understand. Daniel had a prophecy which said when the Messiah was supposed to come, and it was about the same time that Christ was born and lived. And so people were looking forward to it. Several people stepped forward and claimed to be the Messiah, and that's in the book of Acts when the apostles were arrested. What should we say? What should we do with these people? And what I believe his name is Gamaliel stepped forward and said, "Look, several people have stepped forward claiming to be the Messiah in the past." And he listed a couple of examples. And so, his ruling was, if these guys are who they say they are, we won't be able to stop them. If they aren't who they, if they are not who they say they are, then they're going to fail like all the people who came before them. And so they let the apostles go. We can find other examples, Eusebius's history lists a few examples of people claiming to be the Messiah. And again, there were prophecies which said the Messiah was going to come at about this time. And so when the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the elders questioned Christ, if you look at their questioning, they were asking, are you going to overthrow the Romans? Do we pay taxes or not? The Messiah, who they were expecting to overthrow the Romans and reinstate the nation of Israel, would say yes. Or actually would say, no, don't pay taxes. The woman caught in adultery, it was not about adultery. It was about, will you inflict will you apply the death sentence to her? The law says stone her. What do you say? Because again, the Romans would allow their the little provinces and the people they conquered, they would allow them to keep their customs and their laws up to a point. But stuff like, condemning someone to death, that was something that came from Rome. You didn't do that as a little city-state or province or whatever tributary. And so, getting Christ to say, yes, go ahead and stone the woman, that would be a challenge to Roman authority. Pilate, you have your laws, do with them according to them. Well, our law says he should be put to death. And no, they didn't want to do that because they didn't want to go against Roman authority. So that's where they were at. They were looking for someone to overthrow Rome because, again, Roman civil authority was in charge. And they wanted someone who was, who's going to overthrow Rome so that we can start keeping the Mosaic Law. And Christ's response was basically, not yet. We got, Christianity, we talked about the first advent and the second advent. The first advent was when he came, died for our sins, set the groundwork for the law, or for the kingdom. And then the second advent is when he comes and actually initiates the kingdom. Now, we jump forward to Revelations, chapter 14, and it talks about, here we go, God's finally going to pour out his wrath and, the beast power and all this, this is all that's going to happen to them. Then we get to verse 12 and it says, here is the patience of the saints. And that's just it. Bad things are going to happen to us. I mean, Christ himself said, if they hated me, they will hate you. So bad things are going to happen. The patience of the saints is, no, we are not going to fight back. We are going to live under the civil law, which is now above us. It's not God's law, but, Israel lost the right to live under God's law or to apply God's law exactly. And that is part of the first Advent message. You know, back in the Old Testament, God told them, if you obey my law, I will bless you. And the nations around you will look and say, look, what a wise and great God they have who gives them all these blessings. And they turned around and instead they looked at the nations around them and said, we want that. And so that didn't happen. So the idea, the chosen people, it is a blessing, but and there are a lot of people who claim to be the chosen people. The Jews say they are. There are several different groups that say we are the chosen people. None of them point out that being the chosen people was a responsibility. You are to set a good example for the rest of the world, and no one. They all want we are somehow superior, which they aren't. God again, when He sent them into the promised land, He told them, this isn't because you're great. This is because I made promises to Abraham. Abraham obeyed me. These are the promises to him. And again, you're supposed to be setting an example for the nations around you so that they can actually benefit eventually, learn the truth. And so that's part of the first Advent. Are you going to overthrow the Romans? No, Christ came again to open things up for the Gentiles in a new way, because Israel wasn't doing it properly. Let's be honest. That's not anti-Semitic. That is actually what the Bible teaches, Old and New Testament. So, this is the patience of the saints, and then we go to the next verse 13 of Revelation 14, and it immediately says, then I heard a voice saying, blessed are those who die for the Lord hereafter, or henceforth. So he's just talked about pouring down, God's wrath on the sinners. And then 2 verses later is talking about, people are still going to die. Because, again, it isn't our job to seek revenge. It is the patience of the saints to wait for God to do it. We're still going to keep dying. We're going to be persecuted. There will be evil people who want us dead just for speaking the truth. And that is where we come into conflict. Where does civil law come into conflict with Christianity? And that is when civil law and moral law clash, we should go with moral law. It is better to obey God than man in that case. And so the truth shall set you free. We should be speaking the truth. However, more and more often it is considered a hate crime to speak the truth. No, we should. A, hate crimes are illegal because of the First Amendment. And B, we should still speak the truth because the truth is more important than man's ideas. Man will always go the wrong way if he does not follow the truth. And so, yes, you do have an obligation to challenge when someone else starts studying their truth, which is obviously wrong, which in some cases it is. Other cases, it's not as obvious; it just disagrees with you, but you still have a right to disagree. Charlie Kirk disagreed with people, and that's one of the things that got him shot. Now then, so far as civil law goes, Paul appealed to civil law. He went to visit the temple. He was accused of taking Gentiles in with him, which he didn't at that time. He was seen in the city with Gentiles, but he did not take them to the temple. A riot broke out because they wanted to throw him out, and they went over and above throwing him out to where things were getting out of hand. Fights were starting to break out. The Roman soldiers came because they don't care who goes into the temple. They care about a riot. And so Roman law there said no riots. And so the Roman soldiers stepped in and it came down to 10 to 20 people's word against Paul's. Who's responsible for them? He is. Well, no, all I did was go to the temple. You made a false accusation and attacked me. And so he appealed to Caesar because that was the only way to avoid a false charge. So, yeah, he appealed to the Roman civil authority because at that time it was the right thing to do. um, so, yeah, again, some people say we have to completely ignore human laws. Well, no. We are under civil law right now, and that civil law is not God's law. So we do have an obligation to follow it because God's allowing it to be above us at this point. And it is not our job to try and overthrow the civil government. Now, currently, we supposedly have the right to free speech, free religion, and to petition the government. I say supposedly because there are several examples where that is being taken away from us. So we don't have to just be quiet. We don't fight back. We don't get violent when people do things. We just point out the truth. No. Here's what really happened. No, tell us the full story. Why are you covering this and not covering that story in the news? That's what our response should be. It should not be fighting back because no, that was not endorsed by Christ. And it should not be endorsed by anyone claiming to be a Christian. Which again, throughout history, churches have done things they shouldn't have done. And they will have to answer that on their own, in their time. So that was it. Like I said, I don't normally like to talk about religion, but we are at a point in history where it is necessary to tell some people, here's what you're ignoring about what your religion actually tells. And that's it. Have a nice day. God bless you.